For many around the world, the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic came like a thief in the night. On March 11, 2020, when the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a global pandemic, the virus had spread at alarming levels, disrupting nearly everything about life as we know it.
Breaking news tonight, the coronavirus outbreak declared a global pandemic, and now the extreme new measures in the U.S. Large events banned in Washington State and San Francisco as U.S. cases rise over 1,000.
As businesses and offices closed, quarantines, lockdowns, and self-imposed isolations pushed millions into a new workplace reality. With new challenges on the horizon, it marked a new chapter for global civil society. In May 2020, Rights CoLab took the initiative to launch DùnDún, a series of mini podcasts created to help civic actors share their stories of innovation and resilience in the wake of the pandemic. From Burkina Faso to Indonesia, and from Honduras to Hong Kong, the first season captured inspiring stories of how the pandemic helped to catalyze different forms of civic innovation and mobilization. In this second season of the podcast, we'll learn more about efforts to address human rights aspects of pandemic-related policies, new ways to protect and defend human rights, innovative responses to local needs stemming from the aftermath of the pandemic, community-based initiatives to solve other pandemic-related problems, responses to the pandemic's impact in aggravating inequality in society, and new forms of cross-border partnerships and collaborations, despite travel restrictions and other obstacles. We begin with Uganda, where Pollicy, a technology consulting and development firm, is working to improve government service delivery through improved civic engagement and participation. At the onset of the pandemic, Pollicy conducted a survey which revealed that activists and human rights organizations were struggling to adapt their work to the online environment. Pollicy responded to this challenge by launching a program on digital resilience for the future of work. Through this initiative, activists and organizations have been trained to adopt digital tools for remote working while developing their data skills. But for groups like journalists and activists, access to digital skills remains complicated. I spoke to Garnett Achieng, researcher on data and digital rights at Pollicy. Digital Safety, one of Pollicy's ongoing projects, she said, was created to address this concern.
For us, making this education simpler and easier to understand is our way of bridging the digital skills gap. But then you find that digital security education is complicated. It's available in paid programs, and we're just trying to make it easier to understand. So we came up with a game called Digital Safety, and it's our way of making this kind of education accessible, fun, and memorable to people. And it's also available in languages other than English.
In the difficult summer of 2020, as the pandemic wreaked havoc in different parts of the world, hundreds of protesters poured into the streets of Sofia in Bulgaria to demand the resignation of the government amid allegations of entrenched corruption, media capture, and mismanagement of the pandemic.
Demonstrators call this a grand national uprising. It marks 3 months of anti-government protests here in Bulgaria.
More than a year after the protests, the crisis of the pandemic in Bulgaria has worsened. Bulgaria now has one of the highest death rates in Europe and is currently the continent's least vaccinated nation. As Bulgarian civil society groups grapple with the disappointment over the botched protests of 2020, amid the low morale of civic mobilization, Dimitrina Petrova, who is the leader of Bulgarians Organizing for Liberal Democracy, BOLD, said that the pandemic politics around the pandemic and vaccinations have been the focus of the work of BOLD and other civil society organizations in Bulgaria. One of our recent projects is focused on vaccination justice in Bulgaria, where less than 20% of the adult population has been vaccinated.
Bulgaria, unlike most other European countries and many countries globally, created a vaccination plan back in December 2020 in which it explicitly deprioritized the most vulnerable, medically the most vulnerable, that is the elderly and people on a list of certain medical conditions that make them many times more vulnerable to die or to suffer from a severe illness if they get infected. The intention is to bring the government to justice, to sue the Minister of Health for creating this unjust vaccination plan and then implementing it.
In Nigeria, Spaces for Change has mobilized civil society groups against the passing of the Control of Infectious Diseases Bill, one of the legislations hurriedly introduced in Nigeria in the wake of the pandemic. In a civic space currently pushing back against the Nigerian government's escalating crackdown on dissent, Spaces for Change Executive Director Victoria Ibezim-Ohaeri explains her organization's response.
Most recently, we launched a research that we call the Security Playbook. So what we're looking at is how the state is increasingly either applying the security laws and security architecture in the country, especially the counter-terrorism architecture, how that has been used to clamp down on the civic space. We're also looking at the increasing surveillance capitalism and also the increasing arbitrary surveillance using digital tools and digital technology to spy on citizens' privacy and track and clamp down on dissenters and activists.
For Abigail Poluyi, the pandemic was all the inspiration she needed to create Volunteer Better, a project she designed to help new initiatives founded in the wake of the pandemic to manage their volunteers more effectively. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, Volunteer Better, now a fully registered NGO in Nigeria, has provided training for 2 cohorts of volunteers who work in different organizations.
Trying to improve volunteer productivity in Africa, we are trying to ensure that when it comes to volunteer management in Africa, Volunteer Better is the organization to go to when you need help in terms of volunteer support, in terms of managing your volunteers, how to recruit them, how to onboard them, how to engage them, how to ensure that there's a structure in place for volunteers, how to ensure that the volunteers are actually productive, not just having a lot of volunteers who are inactive in the organization.
Experiences like Abigail, finding an opportunity in crisis, transcend geographical borders. Alexey Sidorenko is the head of the Russian project Teplitsa of Social Technologies, an innovation incubator dedicated to creating citizen web applications and enhancing NGO ICT skills. He considers the ability to reach larger audiences through remote communication as one of the opportunities disguised in the pandemic.
I think that back in the day, it was already in March 2020 when I realized, it's going to be locked down for a long time. And I restructured all our activity, workshops, hackathons, all kinds of events. We were able to maximize the impact, to increase geographies, to reach to the people who would never attend our events. And instead of this several hundred people, would have tens of thousands of people who attended our events. And also we were able to cover, but we never could cover them in the offline surroundings. And I think that this is indeed the low-hanging fruit of the pandemic.
Last summer in Burkina Faso, Nacoulma, a volunteer at Pool for Progress, an NGO in Ouagadougou, the country's capital, helped to mobilize over 400 volunteers to create awareness about the pandemic in Ouagadougou's biggest market. In a country where 40% of the population live below the national poverty line, Nacoulma said that the closure of markets during the lockdowns worsened the country's economic conditions. His organization's response included empowerment trainings for women.
The objectives were first train them about community service, but also to empower them. Then after the training, we also train them about how to produce liquid soap. So this was first to allow them to keep themselves safe and also to empower them so that they can sell the soap that they are producing in order to help support their husbands with families' expenses.
But the pandemic also created opportunities for collaboration.
We were able to collaborate with a lot of people from the government, from civil societies, and then from the civilian, people from different religious backgrounds. We had Muslims, Christians, and a lot of people. So there was a kind of diversity among us. This was a great opportunity for us to work together, stand together, fight against COVID-19.
Beyond local opportunities for collaboration, the pandemic has also presented new forms of cross-border partnerships and collaborations. Charles Kojo Vandyck is an associate at CoLab and head Capacity Development Unit at the West Africa Civil Society Institute, WACSI. He highlights Nigeria's EndSARS protests as one recent example.
As you could see from the EndSARS in Nigeria and all the other things that happened, it became a whole global kind of issue because of the way social media has a way of putting things out there. And we all jumped on it and realized that this is not a Nigerian problem. We all have this problem with the way our security forces treat us and the way they respond to us. And so if it's happening in Nigeria, we need to fight. And I think there's that consciousness that it's not about just our individual countries, but we need to find ways of getting together. And so activists are actually now organizing beyond borders. Affectivists, they are digital activists, and they are across the whole of Africa, and they are organizing. We have these Africans Rising movements, very continental in the way they organize people representation across Africa. You have different activist groups in Guinea that have partnerships with activist groups in Côte d'Ivoire and Togo and in Mali. They exchange ideas, they have meetings together, they exchange tactics. Because as you can see, very similar stories happening in the different countries.
In Indonesia, where poor women are more vulnerable to the pandemic, quarantines have increased the burden women carry as caregivers for children and the aged. In the absence of well-organized systems, such as safe houses and shelters, many Indonesian women have become victims of domestic abuse. While Indonesian authorities say they have created access to safe reporting of sexual abuse and exploitation to more than 2.7 million people, Theresia Iswarini, commissioner at Komnas Perempuan, Indonesia's National Commission on Anti-Violence Against Women, said access to safe houses for vulnerable women remains a challenge. Notwithstanding the difficult circumstances, Indonesian women continue to show resilience.
We found out that women has an opportunity to survive since they have a very high resilience. And in the middle of pandemic, they raise time of innovation or initiative to tackle that kind of situation. For example, they provide the aid or donation for other group, for the vulnerable group. They also have a community to handle the mental health issue. They have yoga, exercising every week. They also have community group for mental health, talking about the mental health, consultation or counseling kind of work they have. It's an initiative for me, and I call it as an opportunity to copying with pandemic.
Lydia Matt is country director at SEMA, a not-for-profit enterprise that operates in partnership with the government of Uganda at various public institutions, including police stations, health centers, and municipalities. In August, Ugandan authorities suspended 54 rights groups, accusing them of failing to comply with regulations. Despite the crackdown on civil society, Matt told me SEMA has managed to accomplish some of its objectives.
We did have a lockdown. There was the first lockdown, and there was a second lockdown that was recently lifted. But during the first lockdown, we were able to figure out how to work things. We have devised other means of getting to citizens, for example, using WhatsApp surveys. And then our devices have been collecting data, so we've been able to still create reports using our devices. Our partnerships have grown during this point. Recently, we were contracted by the Kampala City Capital Authority to gather feedback at health centers and division offices, and we continue doing this even during the lockdown. It's just been a time of growth for us because we realize what is needed most during this time is for voices to be heard. We also started rolling out on a contract with the justice, law and order sector. So we are now up country. During this time, public institutions have realized they need our services.
As civic actors and civil society organizations continue to organize for social change in an environment of chaos, uncertainty, and disruption, innovative responses to the challenges of a post-pandemic world remain significant. But how sustainable are these initiatives? What are the greatest threats and opportunities in consolidating today's success stories for the future? Vandyck provides an African perspective.
I think for us, the challenge has always been our ability to work together collaboratively and to make sure that our citizens are conscious of their power and they are at the center and driving the initiatives. You see, the challenge has always been ownership. And I think that's going to be the greatest challenge. We don't want the old stories of, oh, what happened? Okay, some NGO did something here, now they are gone. And so the initiative is dead. We want a different kind of story moving forward, that the community took ownership of the initiative and built on it and sustained it. So I think building ownership, making sure that the aid infrastructure, the aid architecture is community-driven, greatest challenge. I think the greatest opportunity now is to realize that, look, around the world, we all have weaknesses. Africa is blessed with so much resources. The borders are artificial. We have similar histories, similar traditions. We have a sense of community, so we understand solidarity. The challenge has always been that we are not organized and we are not cohesive as one unit. And I think a lot of young Africans are beginning to understand this. For me, I see amazing opportunities, and I think this is the time. I think COVID, in as much as it's brought untold difficulties, death, and sadness to a large extent to all of us, it's also brought the greatest opportunities for us young Africans in Africa to look within. We always knew it, that we have it within. But I think COVID has really shown us that this is it. And I think if we get it wrong now, it would be a shame. I think this is the time.
Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at CoLab. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, also at CoLab. I am Ibezim-Ohaeri.